Hello, fellow wanderers of the internet. I just watched a fantastic documentary called Trophy, the Big Game Hunting Controversy. So the film introduces us to two characters. The first is a guy from Texas who is a trophy hunter and wants to shoot all five of the big five endangered animals.
So the big five is a rhino, a lion, a leopard, a buffalo, and an elephant.
This is my trophy.
And the other is a rhino rancher from South Africa.
I have the recipe to save the rhino from extinction. Sell the horns, keep the rhinos alive.
Trims the horns of the rhinos because apparently you don't need to actually kill them in order to take off their horns and sell them, but it was illegal to do so. So he was advocating that the sale of rhino horns be legalized so that he could make money from his operation of raising rhinos, breeding rhinos, and protecting them from poachers.
Poachers will shoot every last one because there's a commercial-driven desire.
The film allows us a lot of space to consider how to weigh the ickiness of assigning value to endangered animals versus the potential usefulness to their conservation by doing so.
What happens when you put an economic value on an animal, and thus if there is big game in an industry, could that trickle down?
Obviously, assigning economic value to animals is not a new idea. People have been selling cows and chickens in Europe for as long as anyone can remember. So it makes me wonder if there's almost a little bit of Eurocentrism behind the idea that our animals or our native animals ought to fit into a rational world of valuation, whereas exotic animals from Africa or Asia ought to be somehow treated differently or regarded for their spiritual qualities, and somehow they oughtn't to be integrated into the international economy.
The commodification of wildlife, what a vision of nature that will be.
And for me, I think the biggest Eurocentric moment came when the South African rhino breeder came up to London and argued that selling rhino horns should be legalised. And the reaction of the Londoners sort of verged on saying that Africa just morally ought to be some sort of a pristine nature reserve, as though the people living there don't have the same rights and expectations of managing their land as we would here.
So that lion, if it didn't eat somebody, even if it ate their livestock, you're looking at a very, very dire future.
Or as though we would tolerate big, scary animals running free in our society.
The lions aren't cuddly, they eat people.
And most people don't want a rhino on their land. It's a shit magnet for bad people with guns to come shoot it.
So certainly we've got some cultural conceptions of Africa, which I think could be considered Orientalist, thinking of it as some sort of Lion King circle of life paradise, that prevent us from really dealing with reality on the ground.
We sat there for an hour, wrenching, literally crying, and then all these locals heard about this and they started coming because they get the meat. And everybody was happy.
If there's no value and we can't hunt these animals, they're going to be extinct.
And of course, it's just a fascinating paradox to realize that people who want to shoot beautiful animals in cold blood might actually be the best chance of making sure that these animals still exist to be shot in cold blood by them.
You can just pick whatever animal you want from the menu that they offer you, see the price, and book the kill.
Big cats at 21 and 22, sold!
These guys are willing to shell out hundreds of thousands of dollars to make sure that there are rhinos out there for them to go out and shoot and kill. So I can't pretend that I care more about rhinos than they do.
Let's say he's a psychopath. Let's say he enjoys killing. He won't agree to that. Maybe I think that way. Can it benefit wildlife?
It's also really interesting to think that even under market logic, superfluous creatures that don't produce anything will be kept alive just so that they can be dominated over, and in this case killed. And this Texan hunter in particular was really insistent on the idea that God had created all the animals for man to lord over, and he seemed to really get a lot out of that. And it sort of connects back to the idea that I was trying to talk about in another video, as far as to say that even in perhaps a post-automated world where human labor is useless, a certain number of people might be kept around just to be subordinates. And in fact, just having a hierarchy might just sort of be an end in itself for people at the top of it. The pleasure of being at the top of a hierarchy justifies the maintaining this hierarchy of superfluous individuals, even if those superfluous individuals at the bottom levels of the hierarchy don't do or produce anything useful.
If we didn't have hunting, I work in a very small area with a very small tribe, building the sustainable development and sustainable future for these folk. Without hunting, right now, there would be no water, no clinic, no school. It's done a huge amount for the community that I live in.
Yeah, obviously I don't know anything and I haven't been there, but I'm a little bit skeptical that the money spent on hunting is necessarily going back to the community in an equitable or constructive way. Surely it's going to make sure that the lion hunter guides have nice SUVs to drive around. But yeah, if this is anything like any other resource extraction economy, probably the lion or elephant resource is going to be controlled by one or two families who and the money that they make will end up being spent on status symbols for them and their children, and not necessarily spent on building schools. And even if they did, what's the purpose of building a school or going to a school if the primary industry in an area is lion hunting? Why not just try and get into that game as early as possible? So I'm not sure that raising up a lion hunting industry is necessarily the best way to sure, it puts money in the hands of the community, but it doesn't necessarily put capital into the hands of the community.
If we create an economic value, obviously people want to participate. They want to breed, they want to take care.
And this idea taken to an extreme is almost just a perverse application of the Coase theorem, that all you have to do is assign property rights to animals and allow them to be traded freely, and you'll arrive at some sort of Pareto optimal distribution of resources.
Once again, you have to get into this mindset of commodity, which is not comfortable, and if you don't want to get into that, I understand, but that's the challenge.
So I suppose assigning a price to rare animals does ensure their continued existence in some form. But again, I'd like to ask myself how far you can really carry that idea in terms of it being a solution to conservationism.
And that money will all go back into conservation.
When I do a trophy hunt, yes, I hang it on my wall, but somebody's eating the meat. We're using the animal, so in a sense, I'm giving it more value and there's more breeding.
These big five hunters call themselves conservation hunters, but I think the word conservation there is a little bit misleading. Well, it's certainly a very narrow definition of conservation.
Let me sell the rhino horn. Other people will want to breed it, just like me, will want to make money off of it, just like me, but there will be more rhinos. And then you give them to communities like where Chris is from, and actually then it incentivizes local people to want to look after the resource they have and not kill the wildlife for poaching, which is one of the only resources out there right now.
So if you build a conservation market driven by Eastern medicine herbalists who want the rhino horns, or guys from Texas who just want to put a bullet between the eyes of a lion, I think what you'll end up with is just rhino ranches and pens of lion enclosures where people can go out and make sure that they get a kill on their first day out there, because again, the trend of canned hunting means that the locals try and point you towards the animal very quickly, so you don't actually have to spend weeks out in the bush trying to look for one.
Give me one animal that's gone extinct while farmers were breeding it and making money out of it.
And that doesn't do anything to guarantee the survival of the ecosystems that support these predators or large animals.
Poachers will kill hundreds. Hunters will kill 1%. We have to look at these numbers and challenge our own views.
And his proposal that endangered species hunting should be legalized just because there's some sort of positive externality of making sure that these guys are bred and available to be killed it represents a certain creeping of economic thought into legal thought. Traditionally, the law has been more concerned with the morality of an act more than the supposed knock-on positive externality effects of it. And even though you might say the morality of an act is more subjective than the externalities of it, it's also the case that trying to measure the externality or the knock-on effect of a certain criminal act is very difficult to do, and you can use all sorts of different numbers and different calculating mechanisms and different paths of logic to arrive at whatever conclusion you want. So in any case, I think we should be careful and conscious when applying economic thinking to revising our understanding of the law, especially when we know full well that an economic solution to this problem, or a market-based solution to this problem, I should say, will only account for a very small portion of what we mean by conservation.
And that money will all go back into conservation.
A broader definition of conservation wouldn't just be concerned with how many lions and tigers and leopards you've got left, but really more concerned with the systems that support those other predators that compete with us. I mean, yeah, we can lose those predators with probably no significant harm to us, but it's losing those food chains and that wildlife that feeds these guys that is possibly more of an existential concern to humans, because nobody's really proposed a way that the market could internalize the costs of increasing the amount of insects and other wildlife that these guys eat.
Everybody's actually trying to get the same place. How do we get these magical animals to stay tuned, stay around?
It's because we're all working to the same goal.
I think the film did a brilliant job of asking the difficult question of whether or not it's useful to assign market values to endangered species. What I think we really need to be concerned with from a perspective of prolonging human life on Earth is the loss of biodiversity, which makes our food chain less stable, and the loss of biomass, which makes our food chain smaller. And not just on land, where we have visible, beautiful animals, but also in the ocean. Addressing the loss of life on Earth and the sixth mass extinction is probably going to require more than allowing Texan hunters to go nuts. And I think dealing with these issues are going to require some very revolutionary ideas, because there's no economic actor and even no state that's big enough to internalize the entire cost of maintaining these Earth systems. Anyway, that's all I got. Definitely watch the film, and I'll post the links to some relevant articles in the description. Have a good one.